Good morning and welcome to the Chiefs Briefing, where there are conversations with employees on the front lines of justice, public safety, and community impact. I'm Chief Jason Kuzik, and today's episode is both difficult and deeply important. We're speaking with a detective who works as LPD's computer crimes detective and with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, or ICAC. It's a specialized unit dedicating to investigating and stopping the exploitation of children online. The Internet has brought incredible opportunities, but also serious risks. Every day, detectives are working behind the scenes to find and stop predators, rescue victims, and bring justice where it is needed most. Today's conversations won't go into graphic detail, but it will give insight into how these crimes are investigated, how children can be protected, and what each of us can do to help. Now, Detective, thank you for being here. And to start, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to work in this field?
Yeah, my name is Detective Zach Thomas. I've worked at the Lewiston Police Department for 6 years, and I've worked as a detective for 3 years. As a computer crimes detective with the Lewiston Police Department, my role involves investigating cybercrimes, including child sexual exploitation, abuse, and adult sexual assault. I specialize in digital forensics, which involves extracting and analyzing data from devices like cell phones, tablets, and computers to support investigations and assist other detectives.
All right, I appreciate that. So, in your field, what type of crimes fall under the Computer Crimes Unit and ICAC?
I investigate a lot of crimes related to stalking, telephonic harassment, online child exploitation, and adult sexual assault.
All right, and then in relation to that, so how do these investigations typically begin? Are most crimes or cases kind of discovered through reports from the public, online monitoring, or is there some other avenue where they come to your attention?
It's a combination of that. Typically, my child exploitation cases come from online monitoring through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They will send us things called cyber tips. And then I also get cases which come from the public, which involves just people calling the police department to report suspicious activity on the internet.
Okay. So, and obviously you deal with technology every day. Can you kind of share how you use your digital tools to find and stop offenders?
Yeah, we operate through search warrants, typically to social media providers. We also have a tool called Cellbrite Premium, which allows us to extract data from mobile devices to include cell phones, tablets. I also have some experience working with computers as well.
Okay, and what kind of training goes involved for you to be able to investigate these type of crimes and work with all the technology that you work with?
I've lost count of how many hours of training I have specifically with digital forensics. I think it's around like 300 hours worth of specialized training. I've attended a few different courses at the National
Forensic Computer Institute.
Yeah, that's correct.
And where's that
at? That is all the way down in Alabama.
All right.
And that's paid for by the federal government, which allows smaller agencies around the country to receive specialized training specifically in digital forensics. So
clearly a major national problem. All right. And then so kind of moving into the criminal act itself, what are some of the most common ways predators try to reach children online today? And are there certain like apps or platforms that tend to be more dangerous?
Yeah, for the most part, criminals typically reach out to kids in pretty innocuous ways on apps like Snapchat or Instagram. Snapchat, frankly, is the bane of my existence. I have some strong opinions about Snapchat. But pretty much what happens is they will add a kid on Snapchat and just start talking to him in pretty innocuous ways, like, hey, how are you? What's up? And then they typically move into kind of grooming behavior after that. And then eventually they will move into exploitive behavior to include sexual ransom. So, and it can happen very quickly too. I've seen cases where it happens in the matter of not even days, but hours.
So that's actually an interesting term. You say sexual ransom. Can you, in a very generic way, kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So typically how that works is either the offender poses as somebody else who is the kid's age, or they pose as themselves and just say, hey, can I get this photo from you? And they'll be pretty specific sometimes of what photos they want. And depending on what the child sends, if it's a nude image, they will typically then turn around and either demand more through either convincing them of how great they look, or they will say, hey, you sent me this image. I will now share it with all your friends, family, anybody else you know. Send me more or else. So there are typically two avenues. Occasionally, you'll see people offering money to get those images ahead of time. But predominantly, it's once they get the first image, it doesn't stop after that. They typically just keep going and going until the kid can't handle it more and either reports it or something else happens.
All right. And then in your experience, how young are some of the children you've seen targeted, and really how early should parents kind of start having those conversations about online safety?
I've seen it as young as 11, 12 years old. I would say as soon as that kid starts using the internet, they need to start talking to them about internet safety. I would say as young as 8, I think is pretty reasonable. But at any point when a child is online and they have the ability to talk to anybody else, they need to be told about the risks associated with that.
Okay. And from that, so then what advice would you give like parents or caregivers who would like to obviously protect their kids online, kind of without completely cutting them off from technology?
So 2 things that parents and caregivers can do that will really help minimize these risks is A, go through the child's devices to include their phones, tablets, computers, gaming consoles, what have you, and look at every single app that is on there and talk to the child and discuss what each app is for. Ideally setting parental controls on that device so that they have to get permission before they can download an app, and talk to the child about what the app is, what it does, what they do on the app, who they talk to on the app, and how they know those people. The other way that parents and caregivers can really prevent a lot of this abuse is by going through their child's device, ideally daily. I understand that's very difficult for some parents who are obviously, working and have lives, but preferably on a very consistent basis and going through every single one of the child's apps to see what the child is doing on there. One of my very first cases as a detective involved a mom who did that exact thing. She would go through her daughter's phone every single night because her daughter wasn't allowed to take her phone with her into the bedroom. And the mom would go through the phone. And one night she was going through her daughter's Snapchat messages, and she noticed there was another user on the app. Her daughter, keep in mind, was like 12 at the time. And the user she was talking to on their, not their character, but whatever you saw of the other user, that person had a beard. And her mom asked the daughter, like, who's this guy with the beard? And she was like, oh, that's so-and-so's stepdad. And the mom started going through the messages and quickly recognized the grooming type messages this guy was sending to her 12-year-old daughter. And the mom ended up, A, preventing sexual exploitation, and B, helped us build a phenomenal criminal case in that moment. And all it took was just her being fairly vigilant about what her daughter was doing on Snapchat and who she was talking to. And it was a pretty basic thing that prevented a lot of abuse.
Oh, that's a great example. And it just made me think of another question. And I know this might be getting a little maybe technical or advanced in a certain capacity, but I also understand there's a lot of like shadow apps that can be hidden within the phone. And I got to imagine I assume predators would want to share that with potential grooming victims. And hey, this is where you can kind of hide our conversations. Are those something prevalent you've been seeing, or something? Is there a way to even, I guess the question I really have is there a way for the parent to recognize if something like that is even on the device? Yeah,
in some ways. So like some of the apps that come to mind are calculator apps, which masquerade as an app that it works as a normal calculator, but really it's a file saving app that you have to enter a very specific combination of keys to then get into, and it encrypts the files on the phone, which means that the phone otherwise can't read that data. And that's typically where you're going to see a lot of the stuff that the child wouldn't want other people to see, specifically their parents. The other concerning thing that you will see is typically predators, for the most part, have a decent idea of what apps work closely with government and what apps don't. So there are some apps that are not based in the United States. They will not respond to U.S. Search warrants, and they don't retain enough data for it to be useful for a criminal investigation. So typically you'll see predators online start talking to a kid on a normal app like Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, something like that. And then at some point in the conversation, they'll say, hey, let's switch over to this other app. I'll tell you how to download it. And those apps are typically available through the App Store or the Google Play Store. But usually when you see that, it doesn't end well. There's not a good outcome when they start talking on one app and switch over to another, no matter what's going on. So I would say it kind of comes back to just going through your child's phone, looking for new apps, having those parental permissions in place where they have to ask the parent before they can download a new app, because that will help slow down or stop that exploitation.
So that's a great point. So the parental controls can be set up to where the parents have to approve the download of any apps to the device.
Yes, and it's very device specific. But honestly, just getting on Google and just typing in parental controls and whatever kind of phone you have, it varies from provider to provider. Additionally, there are some specialized phones out there, like Bark is one that comes to mind. It's a whole company that's set up to create phones for kids where the phones are very simple. Some of them are as basic as, your old school flip phone where it just calls and texts, and you can even have it set to call and text very specific people and nobody else. And I think those devices are excellent. I'm very wary of kids, especially people under the age of even 16 and under. I'm wary of them having smartphones, especially one with a camera. Stuff can happen so quick, especially if those permissions aren't set on the phone.
Okay, that's a lot of great information. Hopefully, someone will probably have to end up having to listen to that a couple times to really start processing. But awesome. So, community-wise, what steps can schools and educators and even community organizations take to kind of better educate children about online safety?
That's a really good question. And just like we talked about with parents, they just setting privacy controls and talking openly about safe internet use. I would say parents, educators, and society in general could do a better job specifically teaching boys and young men about the dangers of online exploitation. Boys and young men are the targets of sexual exploitation just as much as young women are. And I think societally, we've done a really good job of warning young women about, being targeted by predators, but we've done a poor job doing that with young boys and young men. So just parents and school teachers and community members should also be educating them about those dangers. And then generally, I think schools have done a decent job about talking about the dangers of, drinking and driving and bullying, but they're hesitant to talk about online exploitation. It's something that we as a society don't really want to deal with, and that it comes from parents, it comes from school administrators, it comes from even just community groups. It's something we don't want to believe happens, but it definitely happens. That stuff happens even in the LC Valley. That 100% happens. So at the end of the day, kids need to know that there are predators online that are trying to take advantage of them all the time. And some of those predators even live in this area.
Again, difficult to hear, but great advice. And yeah, maybe it's just a mindset. Like I said, when parents and caregivers are talking to kids, it doesn't have to be wrapped around any kind of particular act, but just there are people looking to find them and to hurt them and take advantage of them. And I would imagine, even as just having conversations with your kids, it could be framed even that generically, just especially the younger ones, I'd imagine. As you get a little older, you want to start having more adult and real conversations with them. But yeah, I would think just understanding there are people that are not always good and looking out for their best interests. So
yeah, and one piece of advice I try to give to kids and parents without sounding too doomsday-esque is just assume that everybody else you talk to online, unless you know them for real in person, is not who they say they are, and they're someone completely different, and they're usually trying to get something from you until you absolutely know otherwise. It's a decent rule of thumb. If you do that, it's much more difficult to get exploited.
Yeah, that sounds fair and like a great idea. Are there any programs or apps or tools you recommend for monitoring or guiding children's behaviors online?
Yeah, just like I was talking about earlier, Bark is an app that I can think of that would help monitor kids' activities online. But honestly, again, it just comes down to some basic stuff of just going through their devices, knowing what apps the kids are using, knowing how those apps work. I think the days of, the kid knowing how the app works a lot better than anybody else, those days need to be done with, because that's exactly how kids are getting exploited. You can't bury your head in the sand on stuff like this. You have to be aware, because it's a matter of time before someone approaches a kid and tries to exploit them. However, it could be it could be innocuous. It could be trying to get them to send money on some scam, but it could be all the way up to child sexual exploitation.
And that's kind of the danger of the internet. We kind of mentioned earlier in the opening segment, way back in the day, especially with parents nowadays growing up, it was more worried about riding your bike and, having that child snatching going on. Now it's just so much easier online. Kind of want to turn the questioning a little internal now, kind of inward, if you will. I know this work takes a heavy emotional toll on police officers and detectives and even social workers and hospital workers that work with children that have been victimized. But so how do you and your colleagues stay resilient in the face of just such difficult subject matter?
That's a really good question. I, in some ways, have an advantage because I don't have any kids. While I have 8 nephews at this point, I have no kids of my own. So some of the stuff doesn't quite hit me as hard as it does my colleagues who do have kids. That being said, there are methods that we use to prevent for lack of a better term, the trauma of seeing this stuff over and over. There's times when we choose to view it because in order to document it, we do have to view this stuff. There are strategies that we can use to minimize our likelihood of remembering what we're seeing. But at the end of the day, I've experienced this a few times. The people I work with have definitely experienced this. There's just every so often like that one video or image that really gets deep into your mind and you cannot get it out. And sometimes talking to a mental health professional is very helpful. But for the most part, it just takes time, and it just takes following those strategies I was mentioning earlier, just to prevent that stuff from really taking over your personal life and just your professional life.
Okay. So just kind of one last question I think I have is, so if someone suspects a child is being exploited, say online, or sees even suspicious behavior, what should they do, and where can they report it?
That's a really good question. So first and foremost, one of the most basic things people can do is just start by believing, start by just trusting their gut and looking at what they're seeing and believing that is online exploitation. I think one of the most difficult things that happens in these cases is getting parents and getting kids to take this stuff seriously. When they see messages online, for whatever reason, that doesn't seem real to a lot of people. They'll look at it and go, oh, whatever, this guy's a creep, block him, move on with life. But it doesn't really address the real problem. It's because there's a real human out there making these statements or approaching these kids. So when you block them and move on, it doesn't do anything. It just, that person just has to click a few buttons and boom, they're talking to someone else. It takes zero effort on their part. So starting by believing the kid and trusting your gut, because most parents, when they read these messages, their gut is telling them, yep, this is wrong, and they need to listen to that. Most adults can see these messages and go, I know exactly where this conversation is going, and they need to listen to themselves. From there, those adults need to report it to law enforcement. We can't do anything about these cases if we don't know what's happening. And I don't have a magic ball that I look into at the police department to know exactly what's going on in our community. We're not there yet. This is not the Minority Report. And additionally, too, parents can also reach out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's cyber tip line at cybertipline.org or call 1-800-THE-LOST. That's 1-800-THE-LOST.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And again, I just want to say, Detective, thank you for your honesty and for the incredible work you do. Your role and that of anybody involved with ICAC as a whole is really essential, keeping the kids safe in the world and a world that's constantly evolving online. To our listeners, if this conversation resonated, I urge you to learn more. Please have those conversations with your kids and share this episode. And again, I want to reiterate, if you suspect online exploitation, you can report it to the Lewiston Police Department, also the Idaho Attorney General's Office, and again, directly to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Everyone, thank you for listening to the Chief's Briefing. Stay safe and stay informed.